There is a major industry event taking place in Beijing right now, Auto China. It's the country's largest car show, and all the big car makers, bar Tesla, actually are there. One company is making a lot of headlines, the Chinese smartphone and home appliance maker Xiaomi. It's launched its own sporty electric car, the SU7, and crucially, it's offering it at a lower price than Tesla's Model 3. How significant is Xiaomi's arrival on the scene, both within and potentially outside of China?
Yeah, I mean, we should definitely not underestimate the arrival of Xiaomi, right? It's really interesting also to compare how well Xiaomi seems to be doing, right? And still early days, right? In comparison to Apple, right, which recently pulled its car project, and both obviously smartphone manufacturers. And Xiaomi had a lot of orders come in, right? They have a long backlog of orders, which will also mean that it will be a while before we see Xiaomi going for overseas markets, because at the moment there's just so much pent-up demand for their vehicle in China that it will be a while before the company actually has production capacity available to also serve customers in Europe or across other markets. But it's really indicative of trends that we're seeing in China, right? The whole industry, I mean, starting with a company like BYD that actually also started as a supplier in the smartphone and battery business. It's a lot of kind of these entanglement between electronics companies and now car industry, right? And we're seeing also Western companies trying to tap into that electronics know-how, faster development cycles, and also new digital features. And I think China is really the lead market, not only when it comes to EVs, but also when it comes to these new technologies.
What were the problems that Apple encountered in its attempt?
Well, I think it's hard to pinpoint just one factor, right? Obviously, entering the automotive business is extremely capital intensive. And if you look at Apple's previous or current business model, right, they're actually outsourcing a lot of the manufacturing to suppliers like Foxconn. So I think there might have been a worry on Apple's part that they're basically taking on too much, and that the car business would also reduce their margins, which are much higher for their smartphone and software and services enabled business model. Obviously, it's always a gamble, right? Also for Xiaomi to enter this business. I think they have also been saying that profits are initially very low, if not, negative. And they're hoping that with scale and over time, car models are going to become profitable and also then drive further adoption of their smartphones, right? So they're kind of trying to build a similar ecosystem that the likes of Amazon, that the likes of Apple have also built, kind of trying to lure the consumer into a whole ecosystem of different products. And cars are one of those.
Now, European car makers are also trying very hard to gain a foothold in the Chinese EV market. What kind of offerings are they presenting right now, and what are their chances of luring consumers away from the likes of BYD and Tesla?
Yeah, so I mean, we've seen a very strong showing of German car makers, especially in the auto show. Less so maybe from the French car makers or Italian car makers, but the German car makers are really trying to double down on the China market. They see basically that the China market is the only way for their survival, because so much of their sales and profits depend on the market. And a company like Volkswagen actually has some really interesting sales and profit figures. What they're now targeting is to basically regain a position that they had a couple of years ago. What they're trying to do is basically tap into local expertise and know-how. They've entered a lot of corporations with other EV makers, Xiaopeng, for instance, where they've bought a minority share. They've also entered cooperation with battery makers and autonomous driving chip makers in China in a bid to launch new models that are going to resonate much better with Chinese consumers, because their current ID e-vehicle lineup is not really a sales driver in China. It's loss-making, and sales numbers are subpar compared to main competitors like BYD.
I want to stay with Volkswagen because another issue I want to touch on is a recent investigation by German media that appears to link China to a huge hack of Volkswagen that took place over years, beginning in 2010. Data related to EV innovation was allegedly among the hackers' targets. To what extent is the theft of intellectual property a potential part of China's EV success story? And how is this issue being discussed among industry insiders?